Hello, everyone. Jay, thank you so much. Jay is behind the curtain there. I am so excited to be speaking with Thomas Keith tonight, the director of Bullied. Welcome, Thomas. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Thanks
I
for
want
having
to do a little housekeeping just before we start. I want to remind you that all films are eligible to receive both an audience and a jury award, and you can vote for the audience awards for the feature films in the platform that you're screening them on the home image of each page. So we want to make sure to remind everybody to do that voting for later day. And yes, if you have questions about the film, pop them into the Q&A, and Thomas and I will answer them. So, Thomas, how are you?
you. No, when you have two first names, you're called Keith most of your life, so you get used to it.
I told myself, I saw that and I said, I'm not going to call him Keith. And then well, you know how it goes. The film Bullied, so I'll just read the synopsis here. Bullied is a film that examines the causes and consequences of bullying, along with the scholarship that provides how to mitigate bullying in schools. And I have to tell you, I watched the film, and I'll let you get into more about what the film and how we go through it all. But I felt while bullying is, it seems, ever present in our school systems and in our life, you always have a bullying story. It feels so relevant right now. This film feels very relevant right now. So tell us a little bit about where this film came from for you.
Um, so the story's a little circuitous, and so I apologize, but I was working on a second film that I'm still in production on, and we're just about ready to go into post. And long story short, we were having a production meeting, and I said, people need to see the victims of othering and things like that, so they can tell their stories. And it came to me that one of the places where you would see this is with bullying. And so as I started to do some research on this, it didn't take me long to find an organization in Oklahoma, and they're called Stand for the Silent. And Kirk Smalley, who's in the film, is the president of that organization. These are families from all around the world who've lost a child to suicide in the wake of tremendous, horrible bouts of bullying. And so I started to talk to him. I was doing an East Coast swing to get some interviews. I stopped through Oklahoma and I interviewed him. And that was it. As soon as I interviewed him, I realized this is a much bigger thing. I can't make this a segment in a larger film. It needs to be its own film. And so that was the moment where I realized. I came back to Los Angeles, told my production partners, this has got to be a standalone film on bullying and the consequences of bullying and what we can do, to mitigate the effects of bullying around the country. So that's the story that got me here.
And you opened the film with him talking about a tattoo that he has on his arm. And the hurt in his face, and it's beautiful storytelling. I just, it's because the things that you don't realize about the bullying, or maybe people do or don't. I think it's one of those things that, as a social bullying as a social construct, it's something that happens and you just got to get over it, but it's not. And I think that you highlight that beautifully in this film. But you get us in the moment that the film opens, that is not what this is about, and look what it can do. Tell us more about that interview and what those moments were like. For that, I want to hear more about this aha moment for you.
Sure. This is, and I'm making my fifth film now, so I've probably interviewed well over 100 to 150 people in my career. And this was easily one of the most intense interviews I ever had with anybody. I knew immediately after the interview, like I said, that, this is going to have to be its own film. It's emotionally powerful. I've had people from other audiences say it was exhausting, it was draining, it was difficult to watch the first 20 minutes of the film. And Kirk is a big part of that, of course. So yeah, what I wanted audiences to know right away is it's not just something like kids, sticks and stones type thing, or, that they just get over it. It's very intense, especially today with cyberbullying. So a lot of times these kids can't get over it. They get home and it's all over the internet and their social media and their friends and all their, classmates from school. It's really inescapable, as several interviewees, mentioned. So I realized I need to dig into this, and I'm a research scholar anyway. So I spent a couple of years just researching this, spoke to all of the people that I was told were the main experts in the nation on this, and some of them are in the film,
Mhm.
to really understand it better. So it's not just, I think older people like myself, they think, oh yeah, well, there was some kid that called me names or something and we had a scuffle and that was it. Their idea of bullying is sort of their view of 30 years ago, pushing and shoving a little bit, and it was no big deal and everyone got over it. And I think it has changed and has become much more complex today, again, with the advent of social media. And a lot of times the parents of these children, they have no idea this is going on.
Right.
Kids overwhelmingly won't talk about this with their parents in particular. And so it's a very difficult thing. Some of the parents that are in this film had no idea that their kids were going through any of this.
Right.
So they're frightened too, that the parents themselves are frightened, could this be happening? And I don't even know what's going on with my child, and how do I get them to open up and tell me that there's a problem? All of this, there are just layers to this issue. And the more I got into it, the more complicated I realized that it was.
And with ties, the first young man who talk about, the thing he was, and I had to check myself when I was watching this, because I'm reading it and the watching it and saying, oh, he was bullied because he's short. And the first very stupid thing that came to my head is, that's no reason to bully somebody. Like, but that's not why bullying happens. And it's those very toxic messages that came to my head right away. Oh, well, this is why it gets perpetuated, because we say, well, that's not, and this not, and let's quantify and qualify how we feel, how we should act to each other. And your film is very much about how we treat each other. But you're talking about, for Ty, he was sent home from school, and the next day he took his own life. And it's a hard pill to swallow, that a child is going to find the means to end their life. And this film hits you with that over and over and over again. But I want to talk more about that for you personally. It's hard to get through making a film. And how long did it take you to put this film together once you decided that this needed its own voice?
Yeah, I mean, all the way to rap, because you kind of go back and you get things and you know how it goes. I would say 3.5 years,
Yeah,
something.
that's
But let me address something about Ty, because a lot of times audience members will say, well, were you bullied as a kid? Is this what got you into this? And you had that experience? Well, I did, but so did millions of other kids. And the reason I was bullied was the same reason Ty was bullied. I was short. And it may seem like, well, why would kids bully you because you're short? Because you're an easy target is the answer. That, unless you've got some big friends hanging around with you all the time, they're looking for something that makes you different, that makes you stand out. It can be anything. It really can be. But being short and you're a guy in that sort of male culture of coming into your teens, because Ty was 12 years old when this happened, is a pressure cooker. You
mm,
know, you want to be cool, you want to blend in, you don't want to seem vulnerable, and he was at that. And I don't know if I said this in the film, but his dad, Kirk, is 6'5", and he made that point in the interview. He says, "I'm 6'5", and there was probably a big growing spurt coming for his son, and just a couple of years later, but not then."
right.
And he had never pushed back against these kids. He felt outnumbered and outsized. And this was the first time that he did. And he pushed back against the bully. An administrator saw it. Both of the kids were sent home. And Ty was scared to death. And he actually ended his life later that same day. Um, and Kirk heard about it. He was at work and rushed home. And so it's been the pivotal moment in his life. And as he said, this was in, I want to say 2012 or 13, something like that. But he makes the point, he goes, it doesn't matter. Time doesn't take care of this. So you don't get better, And so it's just as present to him as it was then. And so I think when people hear this and when they see some of these other parents and other family members, it scares you. It's like, could this be my kid? Because 5,000 kids take their lives in America each year. Now listen to this statistic, folks. 200,000 attempt suicide, where it's enough to get them into the emergency room. 200,000 a year. So this is a huge number. And I don't know, a lot of that flies under the news and things like that. In fact, when a child does take their life, local news usually picks up on it, and it'll be a blurb somewhere, and then you don't really hear about it that much. So a lot of this does fly under the radar, and I don't think people realize how many kids we're talking about that are going through this.
It's a staggering number to think about, especially when we're thinking about in our pandemic mind right now, the number of cases and deaths. That number seems, it's like, oh my gosh, that's massive to think that you have children. Again, we're talking about children who are attempting this. And you do interview a lot of wonderful people who talk about, all right, why does this happen? And why, especially kids and teenagers, and they talk about a lot about frontal lobe development.
That's Adriana from UCLA, and she's a neuroscientist. And so I wanted her right early on in the film so people could understand. Like later on, you see Trump saying, just get over it. But when you're 12, when you're 13 years old, your brain is still in development till about 22, 23 years old. And so the things that you and I probably could get over, if someone says something rude, you'd go, oh, I'm not going to let that ruin my day. When you're a 12, 13-year-old, and this is a group of friends, and it's a humiliating experience in front of your school, your classmates, and again, your brain is still in development, that's an incredibly heavy thing to take on. Now you've been humiliated. You don't know where to go. You don't know who to turn to. And so I think that's part of it. I wanted her early in the film, a neuroscientist, to say, look, they're going to be much more vulnerable to bullying than adults are going to be for the brain reasons. And then again, to get to the other question, I have Jennifer Green from Boston University saying, well, and Susan Swearer from Nebraska saying, instrumental value. They do it because it works. Believe it or not. I mean, you might, if you and I saw someone getting picked on and bullied, we wouldn't go, oh, that's cool. And you might think that kids wouldn't either, but they actually do. They'll get sort of a following, of people to think they're cool, that they have power, that they can boss people around and humiliate people. And it works. That's why they do it. I think it was Jonathan Singer from the University of Loyola in Chicago, who said, notice that almost all bullying happens in groups. Yeah. It's really one-on-one. There's an audience there. It's a performance that they're doing for these other kids. So they're getting something out of it, or they wouldn't do it.
I think that's, gosh, when you think back, and I'm sure as people watch this film, you're going to think back to a time when you saw something that was wrong as a child and you said, maybe, thank God it's not me, somewhere way in the back of your head. Or, and you have so much footage in here found from newsreels or especially social media, where here is a kid getting wailed on, children beating each other up, and the rest of them are all standing around.
Or they'll have their cell phones and they're videotaping it, right?
Yeah.
So they'll put it on social media later on. Yeah, it's a performance art. And I think that's something that's kind of shocking to us as adults. We see something like that, and our first reaction is to do something to help the victim, whether that's getting involved or getting some other people involved or calling the police or whatever you would do. But kids are different here. I think that what's happening is, as you said earlier, a lot of kids are afraid to do anything because they don't want suddenly the victimization, them to turn into the victim, right? Which could happen very quickly. If they, hey, knock it off, suddenly the bully is going to start looking at them as a target. So you have a lot of kids who remain silent. The ones who might say something, I think unless they're in numbers sufficient where they think they can do something, are just going to sit there. The rest of them are taking pictures on their cell phones, or they're videotaping it because they're going to put it on social media. And if you look at the comments in social media, anything, just look at YouTube, they're incredibly toxic, right? They're incredibly toxic. It's sort of like piling on, throwing gasoline on the fire. It's reprehensible. The one, Carol Todd and her daughter Amanda, if you go to the YouTube video, it's just horrible. These kids are telling her, go kill yourself. You should
Yeah.
go kill yourself. You're disgusting. You're not worth anything. And she heard this over and over and over. So when we see these things, it's shocking to us, but this is the vernacular of youth culture. Now they're not making this stuff up. This is coming from somewhere. And that's why it was important to me to talk about media and coaches and adults and all the others that kids are seeing in their lives doing these behaviors. So of course they're going to model what they see. If your kids are seeing you curse at the television when someone comes on, or you're driving and blah 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 when someone cuts you off, the kids are soaking all this up, and this is normalizing these behaviors for these kids. So again,
Yeah.
the
I
adults are the ones that are doing this stuff, and kids are the pupils that are learning it from them.
I thought it was so powerful, the montage you have there, and it's like from low stakes to high stakes of, okay, it's some stupid athlete saying something, but then it's the coach, and then it's a senator, all the way up to the president.
That's right.
And um gosh, just even not, gosh, what was something about that Sarah Palin had said, oh, this opens the door, homosexuality opens the door for things like bestiality. And I say, okay, well, she's posturing there for a political point. No, she's not. She is associating a way of being to something else, which is bullying.
That's why there's a rather long segment on LGBTQ kids in the
Yeah.
film, is that they're targeted at much higher rates than their counterparts. We know this, and the evidence on this is monumental. So these kids are getting the homophobic and transphobic language and all of this from whatever's around them, including the politicians that are saying these kinds of things. When someone at one viewing challenged me about Trump, and you really laid it on Trump, and I said, why don't you pick on the people that are picking on Trump? They said. I said, well, look, I'm not in anyone's camp here as far as go, here are the good ones and the bad ones. But the point is, we have a man who has more influence than anyone else in the world. And that's not controversial. And so when he's name calling and all of this, it's not that kids are imitating, rather it's a trickle down effect, that the local politicians and then the parents and the coaches, and they see that as validation. We can start saying things like that. And if you say anything about it, you're being politically correct. We don't care about that. So we can now let all of our homophobia and racism just fly out of our mouths as, this is just freedom of speech, right? While the kids are just soaking all this up. Now they're practicing this at school. And then when something like this happens, the adults act incredulous, like, what? How did that happen? How did it happen? Are you not paying attention to what's going on in pop culture every single day? And I don't want to just talk about politics. You get this from comedians, you get this from athletes, you get this from actors, you get it from a lot of people who are influential in youth culture, within youth culture. When an athlete busts out a homophobic slur at a game and it gets caught and then they're penalized, they have to understand that there are millions of kids watching this that are looking up to these people. They are role models, whether they like it or not. They are role models to kids. And so they're going to start adopting these behaviors.
And it was funny, I had a conversation this morning with a bunch of filmmakers we were talking about the Me Too movement, and something that drew me right into your film too is that, okay, so we have our athletes, our politicians, but now it's popular culture, right into like the entire Bravo Lifetime network is built off of let's capitalize on the viewership and the clickbaitness of bullying and structure. Speak a little bit about to how we correlate from, bullying being something that, oh, that's so bad, until it's entertainment.
It really has become entertainment. I think you're right. And I'm also really glad you brought up Me Too. I didn't know how long to take this film. I see sexual harassment as a form of bullying, for instance, and that would be another segment that we could talk about, where the B word is used toward girls and women all the time in popular culture, like it's nothing. And so things like that, they just become so normalized in our everyday vernacular that kids don't think anything of it. They don't think of it as a bad thing. I mean, my work before this film is on men and masculinities. I've written 2 books on this subject and have films about masculinity and how locker room culture, and like when Trump said that, this was just locker room talk, it's this way of normalizing the way boys and men talk to one another. And then it just becomes entertainment. Now it becomes comedy. Who can be funnier and crack up their friends by putting someone down as being gay, as being trans, right? As being this or that, or whatever word that they're using. And it gets laughs. And suddenly it's entertainment. Now there are kids, well, I want that. I want the popularity this guy's getting from using this kind of language. So I'll start using it too. So people will think I'm funny. This is what's going on. And I mean, I called out a few comedians for years for this kind of behavior. They were using really vulgar, acerbic, slurs toward gay people or trans people or people with disabilities. It goes on and on and on. And it would normalize this because kids are watching this on TV, on Comedy Central. It's funny. They're they're using these jokes at schools.
They can do them line for line.
Line for line, like there's no victim here, like somehow we're just being funny. I mean, George Carlin was a great comedian of the past who said it's every comedian's job to find the line of acceptability and cross over it and bring as many people with you as you can. And that's sort of been the mantra for contemporary comedy, when, what's his name? Who cares? When they use people with disabilities, gay people, as their material, right? I had a guy in my classroom one time, opening day of class, say a rape joke in my classroom. And I said, hey, dude, you can't say that in my classroom, all right? That's not cool. And he says, well, what am I supposed to joke about?
Well,
It's like, take away your entire, like, if I can't talk about raping women, then what else is funny? He's been programmed that somehow this is comedy material and you want to take away one of my best jokes?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. This is how it's become part of pop culture now. And the kids don't see it as bad necessarily, or that there are really any victims being hurt. It's just a way to bond with your friends and have a good time and not have to think about the consequences.
I wanted to circle back to one of the young women who did stand up for where she saw somebody else being bullied, and that's Bella. And then became all the attention turned to her. And then shortly after watching, and I'm not quite sure on the timeline here, but she watched the 13 Reasons Why. I'm curious your take on, first of all, the film 13 Reasons Why, and kind of, it's almost, I don't know, it almost felt too easy to say, oh, she killed herself because she watched this film. She killed herself because she felt alone and bullied. So I'm wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've been asked about 13 Reasons Why a number of times. It's in its 4th season now. The first season, I'll be very candid, the first season was, I think, irresponsible. They hadn't yet figured out that this could have a tremendous effect on youth culture. It became the series, and a lot of kids were just binge watching it once it hit Netflix. It became the series that sort of defined their generation because it had a lot of things in it. These kids were cool, they were good looking, they were smart, they were funny, and then things start to happen as happens in middle school and high school. There's bullying happening. There was sexual assault. There is making fun of the kid that's gay. And then the one main character kills herself at the end of the first season, and it was gratuitous. This was based on a book, but the book was very different than the TV show. They had changed the show to make it more gratuitous and more shocking. without any sort of guidance from counselors and psychologists and youth, people that would know about this, like, how should we present this material? Now, what a lot of people don't know is that there have now been dozens of kids around America that have emulated the show. They actually made the 13 tapes and everything and then killed themselves. So I've been asked, as a filmmaker, as a documentary filmmaker, do you feel that we have responsibilities as filmmakers? Well, I think you know what I'm going to say, aren't you, folks? Of course we do. We're adults. We're allegedly smart adults here that shouldn't just be out chasing a buck. So I'll make this, I'll exploit this and that, and it'll really have a lot of pop. And yeah, but there are kids consuming this like candy. Every single night they're watching this and they're relating to these characters. They might have other pre-existing conditions. I should make that clear, because as you said, it's too simplified to say you watch a TV show and you go kill yourself. That's far too simplistic. There are other pre-existing conditions a lot of times going on with these kids. Isolation and loneliness. They can be suffering from, some pre-existing mental health conditions, so that something can trigger them to do something more extreme. That's certainly fair to say. But at the same time, I think the directors and producers and writers, they're all smart people here in Hollywood. You've got to understand that your audiences are watching this stuff, and a lot of times they're kids. They're looking up to the characters that you have created. And if the characters are doing things and you start to glamorize, romanticize the violence or the sex, or in this case, self-violence, kids are going to look at this as yet one more cool option. I was told by every mental health expert I interviewed for this film, do not romanticize them. Do not glamorize this in any way, because there is a triggering effect. Kids will, a contagion is what they call it, that kids will start to emulate these behaviors and see them as appropriate behaviors when things are bad.
I want to remind our audience who is watching that we are talking to Thomas Keith, the director, creator of Bullied, which is a feature-length documentary that you can watch right now here, Woods Hole Film Festival. And to remind you to put your questions right in the Q&A tab, and we will answer those questions for you. So I wanted to also talk about something, from being filmmakers, and especially if there are filmmakers watching, there's something about the reality TV angle in here that I wanted to harp on as well, is that, I think for most of us that are in the industry, we know that reality TV is not reality. There is a very big difference. And even from a filmmaker's standpoint, a lot of times your way into the industry is to work in reality. And so many of these catfights, these situations are manufactured by filmmakers, directors, story writers, to then make this very explosive thing. And what you were, it makes them feel, oh, okay, well, there's something I can emulate to get through. Because and something that wasn't super talked about, but I think it was kind of wrapped up at the end, is that why does a bully? Right? And it's about belonging and maybe deflecting. And I do see things like the 13 Reasons Why and some of these reality TV shows as playbooks to that. So could you speak a little bit about the breakdown of why the bullies?
Jonathan Singer called it compelling how-to, is how he puts some of these shows. The reality TV stuff that's the great author and friend of mine, Jennifer Posner, who wrote the book about reality television, particularly the way it demeans girls and women. And like you said, these cat fights where it normalizes these behaviors of calling each other horrible things, and then it actually becomes physical. And I've asked students, I remember when Jersey Shore was big, and you'd watch it, and it was just like this train wreck of these people that were just fighting and drugging and drinking and all this stuff. And I would ask my students, and it was the most, it was the highest rated show for MTV ever back in. And so I'd say, so tell me what makes it cool. Now, these are college students, and I don't think you get the same reactions from maybe middle school and early high school, but they would say, oh, it's fun to watch them because they're like a train wreck.
Mm.
It's fun to watch the train wreck behavior. You know, you're kind of a fly on the wall watching this real dysfunction going on, and that's funny or that's fun. But what I started noticing is I'd go to the mall or something, is all these boys were starting to spike their hair and emulate these guys and get the Ed Hardy gear and start, you know, so this is what you have to understand is kids will see this through a different lens than you and I, or even my students who are looking at it like, oh God, these people are really weird and crazy and this is kind of fun to watch. But the younger kids are looking at them like, this is kind of cool, and they start emulating them. So it becomes, as Singer says, a compelling how-to. You want to be like these kids? I mean, back in the day, there was Melrose Place, and there are these different shows that were sort of created for teen audiences mainly. And that's great, to make content specifically for teen audiences. But I think, again, as adults, we have to be aware that we're not our peers that are watching it are not peers. These would be like our kids are watching this. And they have their own realities Monday through Friday at their schools. And those little dramas are playing themselves out. So they have this drama, that's their real life. Then they come home and watch this scripted drama that's in the guise of some kind of reality television as sort of, oh, I like this guy, or I like this girl, or I like this person. And they start emulating these people, whether it's, the way they talk, the way they dress, or even the behaviors of drinking and drugging and getting into fights and things like that. They start thinking that makes them look tough and cool, and it gives them credibility with their peers and their friends. So, I think, again, whether it's reality television, whether it's, narrative filmmaking and narrative television, you've got to be smart enough to realize that these kids are going to emulate the things they see and hear if they start thinking these characters are cool. And you and I might go, what's cool about them? Well, that's their reality. They're 13, 14, 15 years old. They're not thinking like you and I. You and I might go, there's nothing attractive about these people, but that's not how they see it. These people are cool because people are looking up to them and they have lots of friends, right? And people want to know them and all of that. And that's,
they're on TV, they're cool.
that's youth culture. Youth culture is a microcosm, of reality. It's again, it's a pressure cooker where the things that you and I would go, oh, you got to be kidding. No, it's compelling to them that their realities are different right then. If their friend in front of other friends were to say something humiliating, that's disastrous to them. It's like, it's so much they shut down entirely. They could be self-harmful. A lot of girls in particular, the statistics show you, will start cutting. They'll have these self-cutting behaviors. And it could be something that you and we would never react that way. Our reactions would be wholly different than that. So I think that as filmmakers or TV producers, directors, writers, we have to appreciate that the audience you're targeting to is very different than your peers in the way that you would react to these things, and take that into account and speak to experts. They're more than happy to help. Believe me, I know all of them now. They're more than happy. Susan Swearer, who's in the film, worked on the Lady Gaga project, Born That Way project, and so it's great that people like Lady in experts and having their voices part of the conversation about how do we represent LGBT youths, in films or music videos or whatever you're making. How do we portray and represent, children of color or from different parts of the world? You have those conversations so that, first of all, the world is changing. So if you're 40, 50 years old and you're seeing it the way you said in your locker room, the world's completely different now, right? And so kids are the first ones to look at something and go, well, that's not even real, that's fake, that we don't act like that or we don't talk like that. So, I think there's realism you want to get to if you're a filmmaker. And, someone my age, if I'm going to make a film about youth culture, a lot of my the people that would be helping me and advising me would be young people.
Right,
I
right.
didn't know
Because
that.
I'm at that age too where I'm like, I better remember what it was like. I have a question here from Emily. Emily wants to know, what is the repercussions for a bully whose victim killed themselves? Do they have emotional problems afterwards? I'm sure I know with one of the young women, and I was just looking for her name here, the young African American girl who so young,
Yeah.
and her mother was still looking for the case to be open. So what does that look like for a bully after a victim kills themselves?
You know, that's a great question, and there's not a lot of data about this, and I think I know why. I can explain what happens. In the wake of a youth suicide where bullying is thought to have been one of the things that impacted that, almost immediately the school begins to cover themselves because there are going to be lawsuits. Almost all of the parents and families I interviewed were in the middle of litigation against school districts. And so they shut down. And let's say the bully or bullies who might have been the perpetrators in all of this, ditto. They shut down, their parents start to shut down. They're worried about, are they going to get dragged into some kind of lawsuit? And a lot of times they are. And so it's a great question. I wish we had more insight to this. But let me, even though this wasn't the exact question, let me see, because this is really something I learned that I had no idea about. The experts taught me this. The kids that are most at risk for suicide are not the ones that are called pure victims. A pure victim is some kid who's being bullied, right? But doesn't lash back, doesn't do anything. Then you have the pure bullies, and the bullies are the ones that are usually big, strong, they have a lot of friends, and they're bullying, but they don't get picked on themselves. Then there is a group of kids, it's a large number, who bully and are being bullied. That's number one, the number one group that actually takes their own lives. And a lot of people don't know that. What will happen is they're bullying maybe at school with some kids that are vulnerable. Maybe the bullying is happening at home when they're at home from an older brother or a father or something like that. And so they're giving out pain, but they're receiving pain. And it's sort of like this merry-go-round that they're on. And all of the experts agreed they are at the highest risk of self-harm.
And I love that you brought that up because, in examining and having conversations about this topic with my girlfriends, as we were talking about some of these topics, I had a girlfriend tell me, she's like, well, you were such a bully to me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I have zero memory of this. And I remember I was, a special ed student. I was in those classes. I felt very bullied. So somewhere along the line, an action that I did made my best girlfriend feel bullied by me. And it was probably because she was an easy target for pain I was in. And so that's a small scale microcosm. But having, to then, I think, and I do want to get to, we're talking about a lot of heavy things, but the nice thing about, the end of this film is that there's solution and there's a way out. And right. I think part of it is doing what we're doing right now, having a conversation about it, watching a film about it, and being able to examine where these things come from. But tell me about, how do we break the cycle?
See, I had seen other documentary films about bullying before I made this film. I want to see what else is out there. And again, I'll be very candid, I wasn't impressed. I was not impressed by the things I saw because they were exploitative. They showed the bullying and you're feeling horrible, and then the credits rolled and you went, oh, now what? What am I supposed to do? So when I made this film, it was, and so that's where a lot of my professors of education came in. You'll probably notice Ron Abiaster, he's now at UCLA, who's one of the, internationally known professors in education, said, look, we already have longitudinal studies on this. We know it works. Social and emotional learning were really cultivated in Europe and some districts in Canada, Finland and Denmark and places like that, and they had enormous success. They watched as their bullying numbers would drop in half, And they were like, oh my gosh, we are onto something here. It's been very difficult to get American school districts to adopt social emotional learning into the curricula of the classrooms. And here's their argument. It's not that they think there's something bad about it or wrong about it. Rather, they think we are already overtaxed in our time. There's no possible way we can jam even more stuff onto a teacher who's trying to get these kids to score certain test levels, right? So they get their funding and all of that. So we really can't do it. It's just a time management issue is what they're, but here's what they're missing. And I hope educators need to watch this film. People who are the district administrators and all who are making these decisions about curricula need to think about this. Guess what happens when you bring in social emotional learning, like they did in Cleveland Unified School District? If you remember toward the end of the film, bullying has dropped over 1/3, 36% in Cleveland Unified School District. Now, this should be obvious to everyone, but apparently it's not. What happens when your bullying goes down? Grades start going up. Suddenly kids aren't afraid to go to school anymore. Now they're more focused on what's happening in the classroom instead of afraid of what's going to happen when they go into the hallway. So it has to start. It's kindergarten, first, second, third, where you start to cultivate these. It's sort of a, it is values. And this is another, I know this is going to get political, but there are parents out there that will say values should stay at the home. They shouldn't be in the classroom. Oh, come on. Look, if you go into any kindergarten or first grade classroom in America, there are signs on the wall, you know, that are just, they're innocuous. They're like, you know, don't be mean, you know, be kind, you know,
And
things like that.
yeah, yeah.
You would hope that's not a political statement, by the way, right? You'd look
Right.
at this, who's exactly getting upset about this? But
Yeah.
there are people who do. Anyway, what they're doing in the classrooms is they're integrating social and emotional learning into the existing curricula. It's not a standalone subject. So if you're talking about English literature and you're talking about history or whatever your subjects are, you find ways to bring this material into the already existing programs. What we know, and this is now longitudinal again, I want to make that clear if you're an educator out there, it works.
Yes.
Simply works. Every district that has adopted social emotional learning has seen a plunge in behavioral problems, bullying problems, episodes where they had to bring in, you know, some sort of corrective measures and things like this. It works. No one's doubting this all over the world. We know this, right? So now I guess it is, we have to sell it to the American school districts and I guess the American public in general, because there will be parents that are upset. I understand that. But if something works, and it does, I thought it needed to come into this film and give people hope that, because it is happening in America. I said Cleveland, but here in California, you'll see that it ends in the classroom with those kids in the classroom. That's a classroom not far from Pasadena, a district not far from Pasadena, and they have had enormous. And this is K through 6.
Yeah.
This is K through 6, and they've seen enormous drop off in bullying.
And just we unfortunately have to wrap up, but I wanted to point out too, to your point, Mackenzie's mother in the film says, I trust our educators basically with my child 8 hours a day. 8 hours a day, and there's certainly a lot of conversation that needs to happen around the support of those educators and a system like this that when you have the proof right there, it's the numbers are staggering. And I think it's I loved that you wrapped up your film with this, and I want to leave our audience with a quote from the film that is a Maya Angelou quote. It says, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Yep. And that was a second grade class where they're all chanting that together and reinforcing to be kind to one another, to be conscientious and be courteous to one another. It sounds simple. And again, it sounds apolitical.
Yeah.
So that's why when I do talks, this isn't politics. All of us have kids, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, Progressive. We all have kids. We all love our kids.
Yeah.
We want to stop. That's all. So let's join together and make it stop.
I want to thank you so much for, first of all, for the conversation. I'm getting all teary-eyed here. For the conversation and for making the film, and really, and for really trusting your gut and making that short interview into this feature film. I think it's wonderful for our audience. Again, the film is Bullied. And Thomas, thank you so much for being here. Hey, the Woods Hole Film Festival is going on. You have the opportunity to watch the films right through August 1st and vote on them. So don't forget to vote as well. Again, Thomas, thank you for being here, and thank you for your film.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Have a good night.
Have a good day, everyone.